Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is a young conservative friend of mine. He's one of the, if not the youngest guest I've had on today. He owns a patriotic e-commerce company called I Love My Freedom, as well as a content and news brand called Trending Politics. He's 23. This guy is super sharp, proud conservative, just reasonable dude, right? I mean, I think we talk about this in the conversation. It's probably harder than ever to be a early 20s conservative. It's definitely not encouraged in a lot of universities. It's they're given a little bit of a hard time because of their viewpoints. So, I talked to him about what it's like kind of being conservative, what it was like going through college education with his conservative viewpoints, as well as just kind of what's going on today. I lean more libertarian, which we dive into that, kind of the differences between conservatism and libertarianism, but they're getting closer and closer the last few years, just because I feel like the Democratic Party is going through a little bit of a reshift. I felt the Conservative Party went through that, a decade ago, just kind of figuring out who they were. And I think the Democratic Party is doing that right now. What do they really stand for? Who are they really going after? So we talk about what are kind of the similarities and differences between the libertarian viewpoint and the conservative viewpoint, and just overall a good conversation. I'm always grateful to catch up with friends. We've done some business together. Just a super quality, honest, genuine dude. So here's Jack Murphy. Enjoy the episode.
This is Openly Outspoken with Jeremy Adams, where differing opinions are not only accepted, they're encouraged.
All right, Jack, we're live. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's been known each other for a little bit here.
We have, and you're actually one of my younger guests so far, so congratulations. I have one even younger than you next week, which is wild. She's going to be only 19, so I'm gonna be bringing on a teenager to the show. But how old are you? You're not too far from that.
Yeah, I'm 23.
Okay, so you're a little bit younger than Max and me, and my brother, who runs our stores, he's 25, so you're similar age to him.
Nice.
Christopher.
That's my 25-year-old goal is to get this brand to 100 million before I'm 26.
Yeah.
So that's the goal there. That'll be fun.
I want to talk to you about your brand because we obviously have done some business together and we are in similar verticals. But I didn't even know you were a football player. What position did you play?
I played all over the place. In high school, defensive tackle, defensive end, outside linebacker, inside linebacker, running back, a little bit of slot. I was all over the place. And then in college, it was pretty much outside linebacker because I was too small to play defensive line. So
yeah, I was gonna guess like tight end for you or something. I don't know why I was gonna guess that, but
yeah, I had a lot more fun hitting the quarterbacks blind in the back. That was always more fun than getting hit and playing offense.
So you played in college?
I played kind of. I redshirted the first year, and then second year blew my shoulder out, which is kind of one of the ultimate reasons that led to dropping out of school and doing the business thing full time. But I played sophomore year with a torn labrum, and I had to wear one of those, I can't remember what they call it, but it's a big thing that you wear around your upper body, and it just suffocates you. And it keeps your shoulder intact, but yeah, that was when football became no fun, when I got hurt and had to play through that. for a year. I blew it out like complete fluke injury. I'd never been like legitimately hurt in football or baseball or hockey or any sports. And then I did a swim move on air in the middle of the summer doing after a strength and conditioning workout, and my shoulder just like popped in and out. And then it was kind of dropping out for the next couple of days, and I realized something was messed up. Then got the fun MRI that you have to do, and tore my labrum and finished the year, and then got surgery on it. So it was weird. The one time I get hurt playing contact sports is a fluke on air. So tell me how that makes sense.
I feel like that actually happens. You hear about stuff like that all the time. Like I know this, I'm a big Braves fan in our division, the Mets. This guy, Yoenis Cespedes, got hurt like on his cattle ranch. Just like weird stuff happens. It's like not, people fall down stairs and get splinters and blisters random places, and yeah, it messes them up.
Yeah, it's like I get my legs blown out playing defensive end and linebacker, getting offense lineman cut blocking and chop blocking, and the only way I get hurt is on the air. So makes sense.
So you were wearing an equivalent to a full body mask then, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, that's basically what it was.
So
I had no choice.
For listeners, just imagine how annoying masks are in 2021 where you can barely breathe. Jack was wearing one over his whole body. He just couldn't move.
Yeah, that's below the shoulder pads, below the helmet. It's suffocating. It like makes your endurance like half as good. So
you dropped out of college, and then you started. When did you start I Love My Freedom?
So the I Love My Freedom story is a little bit longer story. So it was originally a news website, ilovemyfreedom.org. And Al and Clayton kind of started that before my business partners, Al Ferretti and Clayton Kearns. They started that, or Al started that in 2015 just as a news website. And then in 2016, I started some patriotic e-com brands that weren't connected with them. And then a couple of years later, I ended up being a writer for ilovemyfreedom.org. I was a conservative commentator. I was pretty big on Twitter in the political world before I got banned for no reason.
Oh, you got banned? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I had like 350,000 followers or something. And then I logged in and I was banned, and they never gave me a reason, never gave me a warning. So I was pretty involved in putting out really good conservative content back during when Trump was running, and after he won, obviously. And then, so I was writing for them. I was doing my e-com brands on the side. And then ultimately my shoulder thing happened. I wasn't having fun in college. I wasn't learning anything. And then Al and Clayton kind of convinced me to fly out to Traffic and Conversion in 2018 in San Diego. And I had never been to the West Coast. So I took a week off of school, went out there, and we all just kind of had a really good synergy because at that time I was writing and I was doing my own e-com stuff, and we kind of had an idea like, hey, let's rebuild the e-com brand under the I Love My Freedom umbrella and then rebrand I Love My Freedom to Trending Politics. And so I basically rebuilt what I was doing, and we just scaled up from there. So
that's that one time we had lunch in San Diego. I think that was 2018. Is that when we first met?
I think that might have been 2019.
Okay.
I remember.
So you had been working with them for a year by then.
Yeah, okay. I think that was 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So it all started in Traffic and Conversions. That's like the only conference I give a shit about going to nowadays is Traffic and Conversions, I feel like.
I feel like everybody goes to that. So
yeah. No, I know you're the same way. I've been spending a lot more of my time at masterminds. That seems to be a better use if I'm going to travel somewhere. Conferences, it's a giant crapshoot.
Oh, absolutely. Unless you're meeting up with like 12 different people just to touch base. But masterminds have been awesome. It's been interesting during COVID, but the people are still doing them. There's still golden nuggets out there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is it like from your perspective being in the space of selling conservative leaning products online? Is that something you're passionate about?
Yeah, absolutely. It turns off a lot of people because mean, there's a lot of hoops that you're constantly jumping through. I'm sure you guys have seen it. I know you guys have seen it. We've talked about ad account issues and all of that. But what I love about it is it's pretty much like just the most fun, passionate audience to sell to, for one. And then for two, it makes you not be complacent because obviously things are always changing and evolving in the political world. We saw that with the quote unquote insurrection that took place at the Capitol. We've had Facebook ads turned off since the election, and you guys experienced that. And so I think the art of hedging becomes real when you're doing conservative news and conservative products. And so we're always constantly looking at, different ways to hedge and build email, build SMS, build subscription, build an app, and always find workarounds to constantly get better. And it's fun because there's always a challenge. And we've learned a ton over the last couple of years going through this and seeing the different, just everything's evolving with just what you can and can't do with politics and advertising. So that's why I'm passionate about it. It's fun.
Yeah. What was it like? So what college did you go to?
It's called William Jewell College. Yeah.
So what was it like going to that school being a conservative student?
It was a blast. No, so that was around the time that I was really big on Twitter, was 2017. I started college at the end of middle of 2016, I guess. And so Trump won, November, can't remember the date, 7th, 3rd, one of the days there in 2016. And the day after the election, they at my college had puppies and ice cream, like an ice cream buffet, a bunch of weird, just weird things that I was like, this is weird. So then a couple weeks later, they do a forum with a couple of the teachers on how to get along with people who have opposing political views, because obviously there was a little tension in the country at the time. And in the forum, one of the teachers that's up there talking, or professors, if that's what you want to call them, was up there talking and basically said to all the people on campus that have Trump flags in their windows, they're basically trying to tell you that they support the KKK and they're a bunch of racist bigots, basically. So that was interesting. And then in my public speaking class, I gave a little speech the day before the election about how Trump was going to win and why he was going to win and how he was mobilizing the country and actually putting effort into understanding what average Americans want. And the speech professor basically laughed at me during the speech. So then the next day after the election, I came back and was like, yeah, I remember when you were laughing at that? Like, what are you going to say now? And he literally, nothing. So it was fun going to liberal college. That, like I said, at the beginning of this kind of tangent that I'm going down, that's when I was big on Twitter. And when I was playing football, there were people following my Twitter trying to get me kicked out of my school. So there was a handful of people that somehow figured out where I went to school and who I was. I had my name on my profile, so I guess it wasn't that hard to find me. But they started emailing the school, texting the football coach, and the football coach calls me and he's like, hey, like, you got to delete a couple of these tweets because I was putting out some fun stuff about Rosie O'Donnell, and the school didn't really like that. So I had to delete a couple of tweets, but nothing major ever really came from that. But yeah, it was interesting to say the least.
Do you remember what tweets they wanted you to delete?
It was probably stuff I regret tweeting. Just making fun of Rosie O'Donnell. It was like a meme of an airplane crashing or something, and yeah, we won't go there. But it was interesting to be, because I didn't know a ton about politics before the day Trump announced that he was running, and that's kind of when I jumped into it and started immersing myself and learning and really starting to understand why and how it works and why Trump won ultimately and how he grew. So, yeah.
And you're also 19. I mean, 19-year-olds, and all humans say dumb things, but especially when you're just, you're young, like we all We all say dumb shit when we're
Yeah, I
young.
didn't think anything of it. It was everyone was putting out memes on both sides of the
Yeah, on
political
both
divide.
sides.
So
There's plenty of mean things. What's interesting for me, and I want to talk to you kind of like about, and I mentioned it pre-show, I was like, I'd love to talk to you about kind of differences between libertarianism and conservatism because I lean more on the libertarian side. But when when Obama was president, which is when I was from, because I'm 30 now, about to be 31, he got elected when my final year of high school. So, that's basically him and Trump were the only two presidents in my lifetime as an adult. And when Obama was just getting shit on, shit on, shit on, shit on from the media, it made me, I think I've always been relatively, center on a lot of things, but it made me, I think, kind of like lean left because I was just like, no, like not everything he's doing is horrible. Like, you can disagree with things that he's doing, but not everything the guy does is just, like the end of the world. And it kind of like that's what happened to me with Trump too. Is just he was just getting shit on every day in the media to the point where it's like, dude, you can't. There's nothing good this guy is doing. Like, there's not one positive you can say. I get it. Like, if you don't agree on certain things, but there's not one positive, and it just made me like, kind of, I feel like that within the lockdowns, it kind of made me like lean back right. So now I feel like and which is crazy to say, and why I don't like. I wanted to get to the point. Why do you think that free speech at colleges is even a partisan debate? Like liberals and conservatives should both agree on the First Amendment that all of our schools should promote free speech and free thought. Like, if you have conservatives, great. If you have liberals, great. If you have four extreme to the right and left, like everybody should be able to have conversation and challenge each other's ideas. Like, why do you think that's under attack right now?
well, I think part of that is the way that the left tees up their takedowns. Everything's rooted in either racial or gender or I mean it's basically personal identity. And I think with the way that they've teed it up is I mean you kind of are demeaning people who believe a certain way. Like if you're conservative and again you're flying a Trump flag, you're a white supremacist, even though there are plenty of I mean, Trump had record black support for a Republican.
He did.
But I think part of that is just the way it's framed, and it doesn't help when one political party controls Hollywood, the media, big tech, now all three branches of government, technically.
Pro sports.
Sports. I mean, it's hit a point. I mean, even Drew Brees couldn't stand for the flag because his grandpa or whatever was a veteran, and he got attacked for that because he wasn't supporting Black Lives Matter. And so I think it hits a point where you either have to just bow down to the mob or embrace the fact that you're going to be labeled a white supremacist or racist. Doesn't matter what you say or what you truly believe if you align with one side. And that's how they've set it up. So in colleges, when you have liberal professors kind of running along with the same lines, it becomes acceptable to start demeaning people for their beliefs and root it all in racism and sexism and xenophobia and all that. So,
when you were at college, what percentage roughly would you say? Obviously, it was a majority left leaning, but what percentage would you say had conservative viewpoints like you, roughly?
it's probably it's hard to tell for sure because not everyone there is political and not everyone there will express how they feel. But in terms of people that were open about it, it was actually pretty solid, like 40-60 split, at least from what I saw. 40% being more conservative, libertarian leaning, 60% on the other side. But again, there were a lot of people who won't openly admit that they're conservative because of the backlash they get for it. So
and I will say conservatives have been the party that seems to be reaching out to the libertarians. And it's just like, I'm a big, I'm like probably the biggest anti-lockdown guy you can meet. I think that's like an absolute attack on your freedom. So that made me like anything that was gonna potentially reduce the likelihood of lockdowns and protect First Amendment rights. So I like have been leaning conservative because of it, and it's wild that that is like a conservative viewpoint on that at this point, is to I don't want to be locked down in my house and I want to protect our First Amendment. I guess that makes me a big time conservative, but like that's what's
So
wild about
where
that.
where were you before that? What were kind of like the biggest needle moving political factors for you before the lockdowns kind of kicked in?
uh I would say so that this is where I'm libertarian, right? I'm a big First Amendment guy, big Second Amendment, and big like I'm pro capitalism, pro entrepreneurship, right? So I'm
Right.
not anti-tax. Like a libertarian, just the easiest thing to say. Like I'm not a libertarian that's just like there should be no taxes. Like I'm for some taxation. Like I don't think most or just about all of Americans I think are for some form of taxation. It's just a matter of where do you draw the line. I've always been for let's the free market is a great thing. It solves a lot of problems. Um, we should protect people's religious rights, their rights of speech. Even though I'm not even personally religious myself, right? I understand the importance of protecting people's rights. And then Second Amendment, I'm a big fan of as well, just because it's to prevent government tyranny, right? So like I think that's important, and like the World War II, the Holocaust probably wouldn't have happened if Germany had something equivalent to a Second Amendment, right? Or Europe, some countries in Eastern Europe had the equivalent to a Second Amendment. I mean, the government, obviously they could just bomb us all and our handguns and rifles aren't going to do much. So that's a counter argument that I'll get to people that think the Second Amendment isn't as important. But yeah, so those are the things that I am leaning more conservative on. I was a Gary Johnson guy in 2016. Obviously, a lot has changed in the 4 years. So where
It's an understatement.
yeah, so I leaned more conservative, and I just have been, and weirdly enough, like we're in similar brands. I have like our Proud Patriots brand. We plan to start multiple, right-leaning and patriotic brands. I would call myself a proud patriot. I'm like extremely grateful to be in this country. I'm extremely grateful for everybody that sacrificed their lives and our ancestors and people that have fought in wars to give us the freedoms we have today to be on a podcast like now and just talk about like that. I do not take that stuff lightly. I value the Constitution. So I am a proud patriot. I'm not like a card carrying Republican. But I think, again, that's what I would say the Republican Party has done a better job of than the Democratic Party the last few years. It's like, hey, we don't agree with you libertarians and everything, but we're probably a lot more attractive right now than the other option, and we
Right.
welcome you. Like that, the Conservative Party did a much better job of that over the last couple of years. Um,
Well, and I think when you look at the Democratic Party and they're not speaking up about the cities being destroyed over the summers, of course, what happened was bad, but they sat there for months, or it was kind of months, and just let the destruction take place. And I mean, there were minority-owned small businesses getting destroyed in big cities, and nobody was standing up for them. They weren't sending the National Guard in places, and that's kind of how Portland is right now. But I mean, at the end of the day, when you're radicalizing half the country and supporting, like no normal person's going to sit there and go, yes, let's go absolutely destroy and loot every building because that's justice. Like at some point, the Democratic Party need to step up, and when they did, it was when their poll numbers started tanking in like September or whatever, when they started speaking up and actually slowly pretending kind of to condemn what was happening in the big cities. And so I think that's plays a big part. The lockdowns play a big part. And I think, to me, 90% of people that I meet would agree with everything that you just said about, supporting the Constitution, being patriotic and proud to live in America. But there's that 10% that definitely think this country has problems because that's just the narrative that's been beaten down their throat. So,
yeah, and and I've said this countless times, and I'll say this to everybody I meet. Like, I don't disagree with progressive minded people that there's room to grow in this country. I think just about all Americans say, hey, like, we're not done growing. Of course, there's areas to improve. Of course, there's still people that we should work on getting out of poverty, and kids getting better education. A lot of people agree on that. It's not like I never woke up one day and be like, oh, this country is perfect. I don't think there's anybody proud of the fact that America had slaves. Just about all of the developed world over the last few hundred years had slaves. It wasn't unique to America. So it's just like we can't change the past, right? We can't unfortunately change what our ancestors did, but we can acknowledge it. We can educate people to talk about what was going on. We can do our best to make ourselves better for the future. We can all work together to focus on the present and the future. And that's the stuff that's driving me crazy too. It's just like and again, that's modern politics is somewhat of a complex discussion because there's so many issues and we only have two parties, right? So it's like, I don't think there's hardly anybody that will vote for an R or a D and agree with everything that person stands for. But since there's only two options, I mean, like, and this is a libertarian viewpoint, I guess I lean more conservative on too, is there's some libertarians that just believe in like a completely open border. And I have some close friends that are legal immigrants that have moved over here, started businesses, pay taxes, hire a bunch of people. Immigration is what America was founded on, and we should love the fact that we have a diverse group of people. But to just have like an open border and it's just like let people in. I mean, I don't even know why that's even a political talking point. Like, that's the stuff, I guess. It's just like the craziness I see I would say maybe there's just confusion and chaos in the Conservative Party, maybe from like 2000 to 2010. It's just like a lot of disconnect and a lot of disagreements. I feel like the last 5 years, that's what's going on in the Democratic Party. There's like no clear, like, what does the Democratic Party even stand for anymore? It's like Bernie, I want 15 an hour. It's like, and then it's like AOC, like, that's not enough. We want 20 an hour. It's like, what does the Democratic Party stand for? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
The thing I'll give the Democrats a lot of credit for is they're really good at branding.
Yeah.
And they've made it for the youth in this country a woke, cool thing to, wear a mask, to support Black Lives Matter stuff, which is everyone can and should, but not to the extent that it went. And they're the masters of brand. They can sit here, and when you control all facets of communication, that becomes pretty easy I'm sure we'll get to censorship stuff here in a little bit. But the immigration side, it's really interesting because, that's what kind of launched Trump's campaign, was he gave that speech, and in the speech he said, Mexico's not sending their best. They're sending criminals, rapists, all that stuff. And that completely tore the media up and got him just a disgusting amount of free press from that. But what I think really gets missed is the Conservative Party isn't sitting here being anti-immigration in the slightest. Like, I know so many conservatives that, either are legal immigrants, have family that came here legally, like my grandma and my great-grandma. And so the Democrats are so good at misconstruing and making it seem, and of course there are some crazy conservatives that don't support immigration at all, but at the end of the day, most of them do, and they want to do it legally. And so they're just the masters of brand, and they can make the Conservative Party look like they're this big racist, mean echo chamber, when at the end of the day, again, they're not. So I think that's part of where the Democratic Party has been good. When you control what they control, they should be good at that. But honestly, it's kind of sad that I think they had to rig the election in a lot of ways. I'm not going to get into conspiracies and the voting machines and all that. But the fact that they couldn't just outright win, and they had to make all the changes to voting, mail-in voting, everything they did leading up to the election in Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin and all those states, the fact that their message and their platform isn't strong enough to sit there and straight up win, they have to control the entire media, big tech. I mean, they've been censoring Trump since 2015, and they finally were able to be open about it because of the insurrection kind of gave them that feeling that it was the woke and acceptable thing to do to knock him off all the platforms. So yeah, I just that's my thought is they're so good at branding, but yet they don't have a central message and plan, and their policies just don't align fundamentally with what America was founded on. And so I think that's where it's an interesting crossroads with what's happening with AOC and the future of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one to think that like there's almost always some level of voter fraud in elections. It's just like I think that's probably going to happen in every election, voter fraud or voter miscounting. But I'm not in the party that thinks there was enough that would have flipped the election. Like I don't think there's any major evidence that would show otherwise. But I will say the biggest thing that is suspicious looking to me is the amount of total votes Biden got. Like he beat Obama's numbers. Like, and
Oh, did you see Tariq Nasheed? Do you know who he is?
I don't.
He's a race baiting liberal who is very anti-Trump, but right after the election, he did a long YouTube rant about how this was the greatest finesse in the black community, did not go support Biden in troves the way that the data is showing, basically. He's like, I was all over the country in all the cities. There was basically no enthusiasm for the black community to go vote for Biden. And so you're going to tell me that he's shattering Obama's records in Detroit and Milwaukee and Atlanta when, I mean, the dude couldn't even answer. I don't know if you saw a town hall where one of the black guys asked Biden, other than saying, because if we're not black, we won't vote for you or whatever he said. Biden sat there and like stumbled for like 20 minutes trying to explain to this guy why he should vote for him. And I mean, there was no enthusiasm. So I just don't believe the numbers that they're reporting. So
yeah, it's definitely. I'm not in the camp that doesn't believe it. I am in the camp though. It looks something that did look suspicious because Trump did get I think the numbers were something along the lines of Romney got 8% of the male vote in 2012 and Trump got 16% in 2020. I mean, that's a pretty big jump. It's not like it's anywhere close to 50-50, but he got
But how is that going to happen while simultaneously
no,
Biden shattering Obama's records?
I agree. That's where it does get fishy. I mean, the numbers say he lost the white male vote. Just more minorities voted for Trump than historically other Republicans, but he did lose the white vote again per the data. But just that type of stuff we're talking about and the total amount of votes received, I will say does look fishy. I'm not, in the camp of I don't know enough about it to say, hey, there was 100% fraud. I'm not making that claim. But anybody listening to just think that Biden had zero excitement. Even Democrats will all agree Biden is the least.
No ground game, no excitement.
No excitement, no enthusiasm. He's obviously, mentally deteriorating. Politically, I think there's one good thing about Biden, maybe for people in the center. It's hard to hate Biden because he's just a moderate. He's not that much politically, he's not really that far off from where Trump is.
But not his handlers right now who are running the show behind the scenes.
Potentially. I mean, that's if you believe that's the case, then yeah. But Biden is hard to be like, I disagree with Biden on all this stuff. I mean, it's like Biden's kind of in that like Hillary and Bill, just super corporate moderate Democrat. Like he even had the like proponent of the crime bill in the early 90s, which would be like racist nowadays, and he like has taken credit and said he's made a mistake. But I mean, Biden single-handedly like put tons of minority Americans, giving them like longer prison sentences because of a bill by him. So And that's not that long ago. I mean, Biden's an old guy, but that was in the 90s. I mean, a lot of people had extended prison sentences, disproportionately, black and Hispanic because of a bill Biden created.
Well, and it's hard to hate somebody when one, they're never in the public realm right now. They've done an incredible job since the beginning of his campaign of keeping him under wraps, keeping him in the basement, if you will. And I mean, when one, the fact checkers are literally fact checking words that come out of Biden's mouth. Two, you've got the entire media mobilized to prevent any gaffes, or except Fox News, I guess, from coming public. Basically no criticism of any of his policies or anything they're doing, or the insane amount of children at the border right now, or the potential massive tax hike we're about to see. It's hard to hate someone when they're hidden, and I think that's where Trump was too much in the limelight, and the media loved it because, I mean, he was a ratings machine, but it was a polarizing ratings machine, so that's where he got so many people that hated him. But to jump back real quick on the election results, I think COVID did Trump no good. Did the Democrats get enough? Did they rig enough to win? I mean, it's up for debate. The data that I've seen, and I'm not an expert in any means, makes it look very, very suspicious. On the bellwether, one of the, was it 22 bellwether counties went for Biden, but yet he still won. When you looked at Florida, where there was actual election reform after what happened in 2018, and Trump outperformed 2016, and Ohio, same situation. So I think the combination of COVID, I think they cheated in just enough ways between dumping some ballots, throwing ballots out, lowering the signature verification percentages and matching rate. They did a lot of things, and I think that's what makes it impossible to turn around and go, yep, right here, here's what they did to rig it. When you have the amount of time they had leading up to the election, and you had such an unprecedented situation where there was just troves and troves of mail-in ballots, I think it created a perfect storm. And I mean, we should have seen it coming at the end of the day. The Democrats stop at no end to win. And it's a pretty good strategy. They're ruthless. And that's where the GOP just always seems to be spineless and get destroyed and get pushed and shoved in every way because they don't fight back, because they can't, because the media is not on their side. They can now because Trump kind of opened that up. But yeah, I think it was rigged. I don't know for sure if that's what flipped it. I don't think COVID helped. I don't think Trump's stance on COVID helped. I don't think his debates helped. There was a lot of things that went wrong. I think you take COVID out of the question, it's probably a
Trump wins the election.
Landslide.
Yeah, Trump wins the election if it wasn't for COVID, for sure.
Absolutely.
And I also think he would have been more popular. I think that first debate was where Trump lost some people in the center as well.
Yep.
He looked really bad. He looked much better on the final debate.
He should have let Biden just talk. But.
And by the way, that's another thing. Again, I'm not in the camp of I haven't seen enough evidence either way. Same thing on the left in 2016, Russia interfered, and that's why they I just look at it I don't have enough evidence either way to just support that an election was rigged enough to flip it. But what I will say is, yes, mail-in voting, that does open up some more room for fraud or miscounting or whatever. Not saying that happened, but that does obviously open that. And then the fact that there was only 2 debates instead of 3, right? The second was canceled.
Right. Yeah, because Trump got COVID.
Yeah. So rather than redoing another debate or whatever, which I think would only have helped Trump's case too if there was another debate, because obviously he got some sort of training, because it was a complete 180. But that first debate, Trump kept interrupting, and yeah,
that was horrible.
All he really had to do is probably just let Biden talk.
Yeah, and I think there's one question that you just have to ask yourself about the election. We could go on for days about if it was rigged or not, or the evidence and the thousands and thousands of affidavits of poll workers and stuff. But if this didn't help the Democrats, why are they trying to permanently change some of the voting, the mail-in voting, and some of the laws that they set up this year? Why are they trying to permanently change that for future elections if that didn't help them? Like, so you can use your own brain to surmise that. But
what I would say is that, yeah, it was just COVID was obviously politicized too, which is really just because the election, I feel like that's a talking point that doesn't get talked about as much as it should. But I mean, it's not just coincidence in my opinion. Like certain states were locked down, and certain states like Florida, we've been open since the summer. It's just like unemployment rates continue to decline. I think the stat was like 8 months in a row now, basically since we reopened. And it's like pretty close back to normal here. And if you look at the case numbers and the total deaths and things like that, we're not, you would think, oh, we're completely open based on everything you see on the news. We're going to have like 5 times as many cases and deaths. That's just not the case. In certain instances, we actually are right in line and less. And it's just the data hasn't supported lockdowns since really, really early on. In regards to death, obviously, we knew very early that this virus protects a certain group of our community, which we all should work our hardest to protect. But guys like me and you, we get the virus, like maybe we have symptoms, maybe we don't. We're normal in a week or two. Who fucking cares, right? Like, who cares? Is that worth shutting down an entire state, destroying people's businesses? I mean, so that was very politicized. And again, that's anybody at this point for any type of serious lockdown is, I mean, that to me is the most like un-American thing ever. Like, you're going to you don't have to go to any business. If you are scared to, I saw Texas Rangers are going to have full capacity at their opening game, which I think is great. Somebody has to be the one to allow full amount of fans back. So early April, they're going to have full capacity in their stadium. I believe early April, if not late March, but I think early April. People talking shit about it. Oh, people are going to die, blah, blah. Like, if you don't want to go, don't go. Like, I don't know why that's been such a complicated discussion since day one. If you're fearful, don't go. Like, or don't do it. Or wear a bubble around you or something. Like, whatever. It's like, not even joking, but why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's Absolutely. The craziest thing for me is how politicized and how many people like accepted the fact that, oh, my governor says this is safe, I'm just going to not have my business open.
Well, so question for you. If you think about how the Democrats have teed up the lockdowns in a lot of these states, they're not using data, but what are they playing off of to make people wear masks and lock down and not live life? What's been their talking point that you've seen?
I mean, a lot of them, but it's to protect people, right?
It's an entire emotional play. It's an entire, literally, it's the right thing to do, protect people, but yet they've backed these claims up with zero evidence, but people take them as fact. And I think that's what's the most sickening thing is I've been sitting here, like you, trying to understand what evidence supports a lockdown, but the entire narrative has been pushed and propelled by the emotional feelings of it's the right thing to do. So I think that's been part of the problem is people haven't been using science and data to really understand the lockdowns or understand the destruction it's having to small businesses. And masks are a whole nother conversation, but it's nasty.
The Democratic Party, which is allegedly the party of the people, the wealthiest people got wealthier because of Democratic policy. And no one can deny that. Like, now Elizabeth Warren's like, we need a wealth tax for all these billionaires that generate all this wealth. It's like, that wouldn't even need to be a thing if you wouldn't have just forced people they could only shop at Walmart, Home Depot, and Amazon for the last year. Like, of course they got wealthier because you scared people shitless where they went to Walmart and bought massive amounts of every product under the sun. Like, some of these companies record revenues, like, because of Democratic policy. Like, there's just no doubt about that. And it's like, oh, now we want a wealth tax. It's like, should just never lock down and just let like people decide what like was best for them and what was safe for them. So I want to transition a little bit. So these are some of the things that I do lean left on, right? One, and I don't know what this is called, but I do lean a little left on healthcare, maybe somewhere along the UK's healthcare, where it's what I think there is somewhat broken in our system is basic checkups, whatever, private insurance, out of pocket, not the end of the world. I don't think that's that big of a deal. Just basic needs, basic prescriptions, things like that. I think where our system is a little bit broken is, say, you're obviously doing well in business, but say a typical, person that you went to college with had a kid. They're in their early 20s, at a young kid. That kid gets cancer, some serious illness. Maybe that kid's not insured. Maybe that they get 6 figures in debt because of some catastrophic illness, right? Which these types of illnesses do affect a lot of people, serious illness. So I do lean on the side of there should be something in place to protect from catastrophic instances, because obviously college is a whole nother discussion. 6 figures in debt, a lot of these people already are in 6 figures in college debt, then you throw 6 figures in healthcare debt on top of it. So what are your thoughts on having something in place? Again, it would be government funded, so this is where maybe it's not libertarian, you can call it whatever you want, but it's something where the government says, hey, like if it's some super expensive life-saving operation, you shouldn't be having to pay that off for the rest of your life. Now, what are your thoughts on something like that?
On that specifically, I agree. But what I think is challenging is, so there's a couple avenues to this. Obviously, we don't want the government running our healthcare.
I
turn
agree.
around and look at government-run programs. It's an absolute disgrace to this country and the amount of money that gets burnt.
Real quick, I'll say, the UK, so Canada is more of a socialist healthcare system. So I'm not saying a Canadian system, but from what I understand, more of like a UK system, which it's a lot of private practices, but certain aspects of it are government subsidized, if that makes sense.
That's kind of what the Trump administration was doing for the VA and stuff, was really incentivizing private run practices to do that. I'm not super well versed in healthcare, but what I do think is, one, the government should have absolutely nothing to do with the practices themselves. I think, two, where it gets tricky is the incentive side of, because when you look at the CARES Act that passed in, I think, March or whatever, when COVID kicked up, the first COVID bill, the hospitals and all the big hospitals were not able to do elective surgeries, and hospitals are obviously a for-profit entity most of the time. And so what happened with the CARES Act was the government turned around trying to incentivize hospitals to take in COVID patients. So they were giving them, I don't remember the exact number, but like 4 or 5 times the amount of money for patients who came in there with COVID or had COVID on a ventilator, because obviously they were trying to get the hospitals to take care of these people. But I think it got abused, which could be part of the numbers for, I'm not going to go down that route, but when you have hospitals that are being incentivized financially, they're not allowed to do elective surgeries because of COVID, and you've got free money on the table, and you don't have to prove that someone has COVID if they are on a ventilator and die. If they have the symptoms, they were able to basically call it a COVID death, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me that there was no check on that. But I think that's just one prime example of it's going to get abused. And so you've got to figure out the incentive structure plan, however you want to subsidize it, to where it's not going to get exploited. Because if you look at the top 15 hospitals in terms of gross revenue and their CEOs, I think all 15 of the top hospitals in the country pay their CEOs multiple 7-8 figures. And so I think that's where it's going to get challenging. Is it still a country that is trying to make money and full of entrepreneurship, but That's where I don't know the solution on healthcare. I've not done enough digging into that, but I agree there should be a lot more help for people that need it. But don't expect the government to do it because the government can't even do the DMV right. So
Yeah, the DMV is oftentimes a good comparison, and I agree. I mean, I don't in no way, shape, or form want government operated healthcare. We
right.
1,000% align there. And yeah, like so, COVID deaths. That's a misleading statistic because they're actually COVID related deaths, not
Right.
COVID is the thing that took me out. And there is no doubt about it. I'm not saying it would be like 2x or 3x, but the numbers are definitely skewed, especially on a death side. To it was some massive amount of funding, and
It was trillions.
if you and me were running a for-profit hospital, we had team members to pay, we had rent to pay, we had utilities to pay, we had patients to take care of that still needed something. Money had to cover that somewhere. And you're telling me if I check this box, I get X amount because it's a COVID death, and I not check this box, and I get less.
And you don't have to prove it.
Yeah, I mean, of course those numbers are skewed, and anybody in that case, anybody that owns a practice could probably, and yeah, again, COVID positive test. I mean, if you or me died of and again, I don't think this was like a big chunk of this,
I
like
agree.
a small percentage, but
Yeah.
you or me died with COVID, testing positive for COVID in a car accident. That, by that definition, was a COVID related death. And there were numerous cases that proved that. And again, when you're a hospital that's not allowed to serve regular patients or bring in any revenue, you kind of can't blame these company owners for doing what they needed to do at the time. Not that I'm for fraud by any means, but yeah, I mean, that's just what happens when you get government involved in shit. I mean, it's a perfect example, and that's just going to happen. That's going to happen in our area.
I bring that up because I think that's just one example where figuring out the balance of how the government can subsidize government funded healthcare becomes the challenge. No one really has a solution on how to set that up. And so I think,
Yeah.
what's it exactly like in the UK? Because I don't know a ton about
Yeah,
that
so
health system.
I'm not like extremely knowledgeable, so it's just two ignorant guys talking about UK healthcare right now. But as far as I understand, they do cover basic healthcare needs, but that doesn't include dental, right? So like the joke like about like English people having bad teeth, that has to be covered completely private from what I understand, because that's viewed more as cosmetic, especially if it's like whitening and straightening your teeth. Maybe if there's like a tooth like jamming through the side of your face or something, they'll like oral surgery may be covered. But yeah, as far as I know, just there is still tons of private healthcare options completely. If you have the money, maybe if you're middle or upper income, you can just run off complete private healthcare. But essentially, as far as I understand, the government will cover all of your basic healthcare needs, and it's not the most premium coverage, but it's you're not having to go in debt, and you don't have to worry about not being able to afford it either. And if you can afford more premium care, you can go that route. Which, by the way, like, if you watch the Democratic debates, which I'm sure you did, there was a couple Democratic
They
candidates.
got boring real fast.
Yeah, well, there's a couple Democratic candidates I like, again, because I'm a little more on the libertarian side. Like, they were debating healthcare, and I remember Mayor Pete was talking about, and Mayor Pete actually, I think again, just moderate Democrat. There's really nothing he proposed that is just like, this guy is insane. Like, he's just a moderate Democrat that leans a little bit left than like a moderate Republican, right? But all these Democrats were saying, let's universal health care, basically let's flip the whole system upside down. And Pete was like, we have about 40 million uninsured. Why don't we just create a program for these 40 million uninsured rather than just like blowing up our system? And like, that was just the most rational answer on stage, and he was like the only one saying that. I'm just like, that seems rational. You have all these uninsured, figure out some program for them rather than just like changing the entire system, which would be, even if the government could somehow make a good running universal healthcare system, which I agree, I don't think the likelihood is that is very small. But even if they could somehow pull it off, the transition would be a disaster. I mean, it would just like millions of people would get laid off, companies would be destroyed. I mean,
Well, and it's comical because they stand up there and say that, but establishment politicians are funded by all the big donors who obviously have big pharma money,
big
have
pharma,
hospital money. So
prisons.
it's a giant facade, and they just sit there. It's a smoke show, and that's why I can barely take Democratic, even Republican debates with any sort of truth, because obviously it's theater. That's what politics is. So yeah, there's no way they would turn it around. But I do think that's an interesting proposal if you did build out something for the uninsured that
Yeah.
was somehow subsidized. But
Democrats also, both parties do, but Democrats also, and this is very important, take a lot of money from prison systems, which is why uh, Bernie is the only one up there saying we should decriminalize all drugs. Like even,
right,
uh, you know, no other Democrat on that stage was saying something like that because it just won't happen. Kamala obviously isn't for that. I mean, she put tons of people in prison for things as simple as marijuana possession. So that's okay. So we'll go into that. So I'm pretty. I don't know what it is, but drugs. I think all drugs and sex work should be legal, just from a sense of individual freedom and choices standpoint. Uh, I don't think all drugs overnight are going to be legal. I think that's a far stretch. Even though I know some. I think Portugal was the one that tested that, and actual um, recreational rates increased, but abuse rates went down because there's it's not as like taboo, and rather than spending the money on putting people in prison, they invest the money on getting people off these drugs and transitioning off the drug and stuff like that. Do you I think a lot of Republicans are finally starting to get to the point where they're at least for medical marijuana, right? Like that's getting an issue where it's getting a little bit less and less of a
yeah, and
big
that's
deal.
something that really baffles me, that the Republican Party on paper is the party of freedom, and yet a lot of people are trying to, control what drugs other people can have and what they do. And so I find that really interesting, but I think it should just be, should all be legal and just tax the shit out of it because it's being sold right now anyway. I mean, you can go anywhere and find drugs. So, and that's kind of the same thing for guns too. Like you can put all these gun laws in, but people are still going to find a way to sell them and get them. And so, yeah, I think in terms of drugs, like you do you. Like I don't really care what other people do with their lives as long as it's not impacting me. And so that's kind of my fundamental belief. And I think we should be, taxing it and making money off that. That's an easy revenue stream when you look at Colorado and Nevada, and it's kicking up. And I don't know the numbers on that. I haven't dug into that, but they got to be making some serious money from all the marijuana and everything that's finally becoming legal. So
100%. Not only taxing it, but also you can regulate it in a sense of I'm not like a big consumption. I rarely drink. I haven't drank in almost a month now, but I only was probably drinking like once a week. I just decided that I didn't feel like drinking for a while. I was never a huge drinker though. Never smoked or anything. I started trying a little bit of weed here and there the last couple of years, but nothing major. But when I went to California, I spent a month out there, and the shop, like I went in and I felt so comfortable because the lady was telling me like where it was grown, like a history about the farm. It's like not only can you tax the shit out of it, you can make it safer. People know
totally.
where their stuff's coming from. And again, because to your point, people are going to do it. Obviously, if making it illegal was a possible solution, then it's just like that's another discussion. But assuming people are going to be able to, they're going to do it regardless of the laws, which is the case. I mean, drug use, as far as I understand, especially post-pandemic, is like all-time high. Making it illegal obviously isn't the solution. So I do hope, and I like Bill Maher talks about this because I watch Bill Maher's show a lot. I think he's a closet conservative, by the way.
Definitely. Yeah.
He calls
Yeah,
himself
we've
a
been
Democrat.
talking about that lately.
Yeah, he's a closet conservative. But he's just like, if the Democrats just ran on federal legalization of marijuana, he's like, they would win the election so easy. And I'm like, that's how I feel about both parties. Whoever is the one that runs on that, I think will win an election. And I agree. I think it makes sense for conservatives to run on that because they're the party of, that's why they've been anti-lockdown. Like, make the choice yourself. What's best for you and your family? If weed is great for you to relax on a Friday night, that's your choice. As long as you're not doing it while you're driving. And, I think most of us can agree driving under any type of major influence should still be illegal, even if weed's legalized federally. But yeah, I think whoever runs on that, seriously, like, let's federally legalize, plant medicines, some marijuana. Let's get over this shit and focus on more important things. I think that party wins the election.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because I don't consume drugs, but based on some of the data and science, it's like it really seems like marijuana is a lot safer for your body than alcohol. Mm-hmm. And everyone seems very cool with people getting hammered left and right. But in terms of like a personal side, I don't remember the last time I drank, like a month or so ago, but I kind of committed myself to I'm not having another drink of alcohol until we get this brand over 50 million. So that's kind of like, I don't know, I've kind of turned on like hyper focus mode, and literally one drink just destroys my next day. I don't know what it is. It's not like I'm hungover, but just my brain just like does not operate on the level it needs to, even with one drink. Of course, if I have more than that, then it's not a fun sight. But yeah, I'm trying to just completely, it's just such a bad habit, and people just get sucked into it. And it's like, yeah, one or two, next thing you know, you're getting drunk every weekend, and that turns into your lifestyle, and that turns into people that you surround yourself with, because most people don't like to drink alone. So I'm trying to just stay hyper focused on just growth. I'm in such a unique spot at my age, and I think a lot of people, I mean, my friends are still every single weekend, 3 nights a week, just partying their asses off, and I'm trying to just not destroy my focus. I've been using this comparison a lot lately. My brain has started to feel almost like an athlete's body lately, because I've been thinking and analyzing and coming up with ideas at like a higher level than I think I've ever been, because I've been just hyper focused and building so much momentum into that. And so it's like if you're an athlete and you have a game the next day, it's really stupid of you to go drink even one drink the day before. You feel it if you're in peak performance shape. So that's kind of where, like, I don't know, it's weird. One drink just throws my day off. And I think that's where I wish a lot of people could commit to, going after their dreams and goals and not letting distractions like that get in the way. So
yeah, I agree completely, and congrats on that stand and not drinking. Yeah, it's poison for our bodies. I mean, we get drunk because our body is reacting, because it's like, why the hell are you putting this into my body, right? So drunkenness is just the reaction from the...
Well, and I think when you love what you do and you're super passionate about it, you get such a much more drastic dopamine hit and just natural high from work and life when you love what you do versus having to stimulate it with alcohol or drugs. And it sucks because obviously it's impossible to say that I wish everyone could hit that point where they love what they do. And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't. And that's just the way it is with how a lot of people's mindset is. And so it's, yeah, I think it's unfortunate. But, when you love what you do, it makes it a lot easier to get that natural high and just be happy all the time.
I 1,000% agree. Yeah, I mean, and I was talking to my friends about this recently, but it is pretty wild how, marijuana, first of all, whether you're for it or against it, you can't deny it's a plant from the ground. It's not like it's all this big formula and process to ferment it and stuff like that. I mean, it's a plant from the ground that, from what I understand, needs like a certain amount of sunlight, it needs to be taken care of. It needs to be fed like any other plant, but It's a plant, right? But yeah, like we have a culture where alcohol's just so accepted and encouraged. And if it's just like I go out with my friends and like I said, I haven't been drinking in about a month. Why aren't you drinking? What's wrong? Like, and it's just there's so much peer pressure, and it's like you're kind of weird, like a social outcast because everybody else is drinking, and like moms and women. Not to hate on like moms and women, I've been talking about this a lot. Like guys do too, like guys with their drinks, but it's like a joke to just like drink wine all the time and like wine signs and memes and post on Instagram about wine, and it's just like it's a giant culture of just filling a void for an unhappy part of your life. And that's the truth of what alcohol is. Not that having a couple drinks with your friends every now and then is a good way to let off steam. It definitely is. I'm not anti-alcohol. But yes, when it comes to a point where it's you need it because you're just so fucking stressed, or you hate your job, or your kid's stressing you out, or your relationship stressing you out, I mean, and you have some much deeper problems. And big pharma, big alcohol, that's just as big of an issue as big pharma. I mean, it's like the same thing.
That's such an addiction, and it's like most people can't turn things off or be very disciplined. I mean, that's pretty easy to see. If you can't be disciplined and you do start drinking to fill a void, you've seen what happens to people. There's a lot of people that have died, got sick, and just gone down that rabbit hole. And so if you don't know how to discipline yourself, I think don't drink. If you want to do big things or you care about your life and your future, but if you can discipline yourself to the point where you can have 2 drinks and it's nothing to you, then do it. But if you can't, then I just don't see any reward in the risk of getting addicted to drugs or alcohol.
I agree. I mean, any type of addiction, and we all have our addictions in some way, shape, or form. Even work is an addiction. Like, there's a lot of addictions, definitely. But it's to fill something that you have a void in, right? And I agree. Typically, if I'm happier about what I'm doing career-wise, which I feel like I'm in a pretty good place right now, like alcohol, I don't really care about. Like I kind of just like going out and it's fun, and I don't need to drink alcohol. Alcohol brings me down from my high at this point. I feel like it makes me feel shittier, not better. So
yeah, my other problem with alcohol is if I'm gonna drink, there's like no stopping it.
Yeah.
So it's 1 drink turns into 4, and then your next day is ruined. So that's why if I just don't even think about it, out of sight, out of mind, for me, it's way easier to stay happy and not get hungover and hooked on it. So
yeah, I have one question more for you about conservatism, then I want to talk about your business. So I agree with you completely that basically if you question, which I did on social media, what's the purpose of these the NBA players boycotting? And I know I got a lot of shit for that. I had tons of people message me not liking that post. I had people unfriend me and unfollow me, and I'm not like even like a big influencer by any means, and like even I was experiencing hate for just questioning what's the purpose of this. If you have, and that's just one example, but even early on in COVID, like I don't know if you paid attention to anything I was posting about, but it's same thing. If you question, or if anyone questions,
I reply to a lot of your stories.
Do you? Okay, well, good. If there's somebody that's just say left of center, that's not crazy, progressive left, so left of center, which I have a lot of like moderate Democrat friends that we agree on mostly everything, and we're super cool. But left of center to center right to conservative, if anything is questioned about anything, you're racist, you're a white supremacist. On the COVID case, you just want people to die. I mean, like crazy claims. Like how do you think we fix that as a society? Like what? Because obviously, anybody that knows me on a personal level, which a lot of people online don't, but I have a very diverse group of friends. If you're white and you're cool, I like you. If you're black and you're cool, I like you. I don't care. If you're black and you're an asshole, I don't like you. If you're white and you're an asshole, I don't like you. But how have we like de-evolved as humans to the point where it's just like everything is so, it's gotten to this point. I feel like we're taking steps back. Like, what would you say to somebody that says just because you're conservative, you're a white supremacist or a racist?
Well, I think a lot of that is the algorithm-based world we live in, where everything is polarizing. That's how you get traffic, and that's how people make money. Like CNN is the liberal version of Breitbart, honestly. But I think a lot of that is, I think it's heavier on the youth side, the just because it becomes like a cool, popular thing to do to demonize people. I don't know what the perfect solution is to that because I don't know how to change everyone's beliefs and what their echo chamber is feeding them. And so I think probably the realistic way that it goes back to a more unified world could be a long way out where, social kind of dies and people get back to like actually authentically communicating, which that's scary because that may never happen. But I think that's interesting where like a Clubhouse app, for instance, when you compare the dialogue on Clubhouse where it's a little more human, it's audio, there's way less hate, way less just animosity than like if you scroll your Twitter feed where everything is basically built for retweets and likes and engagement. And so I don't know what that solution is because that's how people have been fed is directly through, their devices and their echo chambers that the algorithms push them down. So I think it's an unfortunate thing, but I think when things are as polarized as they are, there's not really a good solution to unity unless there's an incredibly powerful centrist political figure who can somehow bridge that gap. But the left's going to always hate the right, and the right's always going to hate the left at this point when it's a giant revenue game. So I don't know what the answer is. So what do you think on that?
I mean, I heard I just have like a lot of thoughts. Sometimes when I have a lot of thoughts going through my head, I get a little overwhelmed. Someone made a comment recently that we have to hold Twitter, Facebook, these social media companies accountable for the divisiveness. And I agree. I mean, I think the social media companies are largely responsible for divisiveness just because, that's what gets people to click. That's what gets people to comment. I mean, it's just the more controversial it is, the more likely somebody's going to comment, share, DM you, just take some sort of action, and that's what keeps people on the app longer, right? Because that's all they care about. So a lot of that is on them. I think it's on us now as the consumers, right? And I think this is the beautiful thing about free markets. I think more and more people are starting to become aware of that, whether you're right or left. It's just like, hey, too much time on social media. I mean, how many people do you know are just spending less time on their phone and less time on social media as a whole the last few years? Like, that's a big movement, right? That's important, and we know, and it's not...
The funny part of that is there's a lot of conservative people now doing that because of the censorship that happened. So that's an interesting, like, we get emails now all the time from people that are like, the only way you can communicate with me online moving forward is via email because I deleted Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And it's funny because those people didn't delete it because of the divisiveness that, people have, but they deleted it because of the way they're feeling censored and that their voice doesn't matter. And so that's interesting. Yeah,
I would challenge all of us, right and left and center and, even far right, far left, to just, it's okay. I mean, that's like probably the greatest thing about our country is that we're allowed to legally have whatever beliefs we want. That's, you're allowed to, we still have a constitution. It's very important. So, regardless of your beliefs, we still have a constitution, but we're allowed to have beliefs. So just your right to have your beliefs. I have my right to have my beliefs. And if you're not strong enough to just have a conversation, what does that say about you? If you're just like, I can't even look at that person. I can't even be friends with that person. I can't
Yeah.
even do this just because of something they said. I mean, that says more about you as a person than who they are about their political beliefs, in my opinion. But just,
Yeah, and how do you get better as a person when you don't want to listen to anyone else's perspective?
yeah, like that's where I feel like I have, and we change over time too, by the way. Like a lot of, I mean, I think it's a Winston Churchill quote. If you're like something about when you're young and you're not liberal, you're selfish. If you're old and not conservative, you're stupid,
Hmm.
right? Because you pay more taxes as you get older. You kind of like don't want major changes. I guess that's kind of a common older person trait. But um, yeah, people change with time. Like there's definitely I am more conservative now than probably I ever been, and I'm still not. I wouldn't say I'm like center right. I wouldn't say I'm, but just of the environment and what we're dealing with, and uh, again, still businesses, not even law-abiding citizens that pay taxes, still to this day, a year after shutdown, still can't open their businesses in some states and many parts of the
Insane.
country. Like
It's
that is
insane.
stupid. Like these people, that's their livelihood, it's their purpose, it's what their parents did in cases, what their grandparents did. Like that, if that doesn't make you more conservative, I don't know what does. It's just like, hey, we need to be able to do this if we want. But yeah, I just think it's having conversations. I think it's great that I respect guys like you, a little bit younger than me, that even with taking a bunch of shit, you were able to just stand up for what you believed in. Uh, and the irony is, like, your viewpoint isn't a minority viewpoint. You being vocal about your viewpoint is a minority viewpoint, but half the country agrees, like in many cases, with a lot of the things, if not more, right?
Well, and I got roped into this not necessarily as a conservative or a liberal or Republican or Democrat. I've always had just an animosity for how the government is run and the way that politicians can just, I mean, work deals left and right and never have a single thing reported about the corruption taking place. And that's ultimately what kind of got me into it. And that's where I think Donald Trump is a very interesting character because socially he's pretty liberal. He
He
was
is.
the first president to, and Obama flipped on this, but support LGBTQ people, marriage, gay marriage. He was the first one to openly do that. I think Obama started not supporting it at the beginning. And I mean, you look at what Trump literally fought against, and it was the entire political establishment, and that kind of was his demise, I guess, because I mean, from the beginning, there was a couple. I mean, it's going to be hard to completely overturn an entire corrupt system. And people are like, yeah, well, Trump's corrupt. And it's like, yeah, because some of the people that he hired and got brought in were also connected to the political establishment. And as soon as those people weren't necessarily on the right side, things blew up. Like there's corruption on both sides at such a insane level. But Donald Trump came in and I think hired some of the wrong people at the gates, didn't cut the right people at the gates. General Flynn, that is a long discussion we won't go into, but I really do think Trump fought against the corruption. I mean, what did he do to enrich himself? At the end of the day, like he probably lost money. His businesses lost money. I don't think his hotels and I don't think the Trump organization took PPP money. At the end of the day, he lost money. And so how is he being corrupt? What's he doing? Him and his family didn't do any foreign deals while he was president. Literally, they did nothing that was actually corrupt except the people that were around them were getting plucked off because the swamp's connected to the swamp. It doesn't matter if Trump was running as a Democrat against the political establishment. I really do think the same thing would have happened. And so that's kind of what got me into politics. And I just happened to align with most of what Trump and the majority of Americans believe, fundamentally on taxes and guns and First Amendment and abortion and all of that. So
Yeah, Trump is not like a card carrying. He's not Rick Santorum. You know what I mean?
no.
Like he's not like a extreme conservative. Like he's very socially liberal. Yeah, because he came out. I believe in like the earlier mid 2000s saying like pretty much I don't care who you marry or who you hook up with, kind of like there's early interviews well before, yeah, because early Obama was not for same-sex marriage. So, and again, and that's, by the way, that's okay. Like people can change and their viewpoints can grow over time. Like that's what hopefully we continue to do as a human species, for as long as we're fortunate enough to be alive. But I would also think that Trump is something along the lines of like atheist too. I don't think he's.
And I think they masked that a little bit for sure.
Yeah, he definitely is not one. If he does pray to a god, he's not going to church on Sunday to do it, right? So, but yeah, I think if probably the one area Trump really, really struggled, like policy wise, he's not radical. Like nothing he really did was radical from a policy standpoint. I think it was just how he treated people and how he talked to people and just like the tweets. Like if he could have toned that stuff down, I think the center he would have been more popular. But yeah, I
understand why he came out the gates the way he did.
Totally.
He had to be divisive to get attention. He got so much
all
free
the Republicans. Publicity. Yeah, I mean the fact that he was able to make it through all like some strong candidates too.
But I think the problem with him is he's an entertainer, and it hit a point where constantly he was still just craving the media attention, good or bad. I think he had people inside the administration that there were things that got set up or lies that got leaked without a doubt. But I think there should have hit a point where he flipped and just went full on presidential, because that would have solidified such an easy victory. But I think he couldn't help himself from constantly getting headlines and staying relevant in the media. And I think, yeah, if he could have just played it a little stronger if you look at some of the quotes and some of the things that actually took place, no new wars. He was trying to pull people out of the Middle East and all the things.
Middle East peace treaties. I mean, those are record that were real swept under the rug. But yeah, Middle East peace treaty between Israel and UAE, right? That was the first big one.
Yeah, and they had Jared Kushner and Ivanka, who are liberal, running a lot of the foreign policy, but the media is not going to frame it that way, because if there are liberals who are supporting what they're doing, the media doesn't want people to see that. And so I think, he could have flipped and been more presidential, and that could have made this election much easier. I think he tried to fight the mask situation for a while, and that ultimately backfired because they got most of the country on board. And they were able to tee that up as Trump doesn't care about people's lives. And even the other day, you had Biden in his speech, probably one of the darkest speeches I've ever heard, talking about all the deaths. And there was nothing presidential about it, what Biden said, or kind of the way that the 2020 presidential campaign for Trump shook out. Like he had such a great head start and momentum that he didn't need to pull himself back to where he was in 2015, 2016 campaigning, because he had all the media attention already. So it should have been more of a mitigate all forms of risk that could create negative media exposure, and that wasn't the strategy that they really went down. When he said when the shooting starts, or when the looting starts, the shooting starts, stuff like that, they can so quickly turn and brand you as, boom, Trump wants Black Lives Matter protesters to be shot and killed by police because of one quote or one tweet that he sent. And so again, that wasn't a presidential thing. I actually didn't like how he handled that. I would have rather seen him from the beginning immediately strongly condemn what happened in the George Floyd thing and actually try to bring in like an actual unified message.
I agree completely. He dropped the ball there. Yeah.
It was going to be hard because there was going to be division regardless, but I think he could have played it so much more middle and almost treated it, even if that's not what the base wanted, but treated it as if it was another 9/11 type thing, where it was like the next day everyone's patriotic and loves each other. Of course, that wasn't going to happen, but if he could have just branded that message a little bit cleaner, then it was just more division. And it was the perfect storm of COVID, of police, of everything that just took him down.
Yeah, I actually think if he would have handled that better, he could have won the election too. I think.
And he did good things for the African American community with prison reform and a lot of things they were doing. But that gets completely covered covered up when you're sitting here tweeting when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Like, that's the quickest way to destroy. He literally destroys his entire legacy by not handling the last, honestly, 8 months correctly.
I agree completely. I want to dive into kind of what you're up to with I Love My Freedom. So what you've mentioned some big numbers. You're not drinking until you're at 50 million. You want to get to 100 million by 25, or by your 26th birthday, essentially. So by 25 and 364 days.
Yeah, it's like 860 something days. I don't know.
So what are your plans to make that happen? Is it going to be through e-commerce, through lead gen? Like, how are you growing the business right now?
Yeah, we're so it's interesting. We started out in 2018 building a pretty authentic brand, and then we kind of pivoted to kind of morph brand slash heavy acquisition, because we're a news site as well. So traffic helps, and we kind of blended the two, and we're kind of flipping now, still gonna play our acquisition model, but going way heavier back on authentic brand, authentic promos, and just quality service, quality products. We've been through so many ups and downs with fulfillment and customer service and some of the people that we've had leading it, and we've just not had the right people in the right place, and ultimately that's created a subpar service for a lot of our customers. But we're flipping. I think we've cracked some codes. I won't go into the details of that quite yet, in terms of how we're going to really scale this. So we've got right now our operations side is running the best it's ever run, 100-fold. It's insane. Literally, things are smoother than they've ever been, and we're kicking up volume pretty consistently without really pushing hard yet. I wouldn't have thought this $100 million goal would have been possible without Facebook turning the political ads back on, because that's just such a big pocket of our audience, and such a unique way to be able to communicate when you do it right. And so I didn't think Facebook was going to let political ads come back. I'm absolutely baffled that happened, but I'm happy about it. But it just didn't seem like it was going to happen. We'll see if it lasts. But yeah, we're going heavier on the brand play, and I really think we're about to do some disruption here with what I'm seeing, in terms of data and messaging and brand, and it's going to be crazy. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's been a very eventful 3 years, or 2 years and 11 months, however long it's been since we started. And so I'll go into this real quick. We've bootstrapped this the entire way, which has been really, really fun. So the corporate company that we have, Making Web, has been around since 2011. As I said at the beginning of this, I came on board in 2018, and we pivoted I Love My Freedom to be e-com. And so I brought in what I knew at that time, and really focused on building the e-com brand and building, like I said, a real brand. And so it started out pretty strong going down that route. And then the way that we kicked that off, though, was freaking awesome. So Clayton made a petition after Jimmy Kimmel made fun of Melania Trump's accent. And it was a boycott Jimmy Kimmel, or I think it was Jimmy Kimmel, yeah. Boycott Jimmy Kimmel. I think it was on ABC. And so we put this petition out there, sign your name. We're going to mail a list to ABC Studios or whatever, which we did. And it just started picking up steam. And it got on Fox News, it got on Breitbart, it got on Washington Examiner, it got all over the place. And on the back end of that, on the thank you page, we were like, hey, this is right literally the same day we were setting up our first Shopify store, and for I Love My Freedom. And so I was like, hey, let's put a product on the back of this and see what happens. And so we put a product on the back. It kicked up. When you had 200,000+ thank you page views, on the back end of the petition, you can drive some pretty good sales. So that kicked up. We got a bunch of sales through ClickFunnels and to the Shopify store. And then ultimately we bootstrapped from there, kind of reinvested everything. And I've just been every single month just dumping it back in and growing it for the most part. So it's been a wild ride, and it's really cool to say that we've bootstrapped a $25 million company with a petition.
That's
So
awesome, man. Yeah, congrats on that success. I mean, you should be proud of that. Are your parents proud of you?
it depends on the day. No, yeah,
Yeah.
they're proud. I give them credit. They supported me when I said I was going to drop out. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't regret it one bit.
Yeah,
So
I dropped out of college too, so I don't know if you know that about me, but I
I
started
didn't know that.
my first company at 22. We manufactured food trucks and concession trailers.
That's right. That got you on Forbes 30 under 30, right?
Yep, that was what I got Forbes 30 under 30. We did our biggest year was just under 10 million, so it wasn't like massive revenue, but for my first company, but it was a stressful company to run. I mean, it
I bet.
custom manufacturing, and then we had our plant in Elkhart, Indiana. So I'd actually go to Indiana every now and then, and I just it was one of the happiest days of my life when we sold that company. It just brought so many stresses, not from like malicious intent. I just custom manufacturing is a hard enough business in itself, and then it's your
Doesn't
first
seem super
business.
scalable.
Yeah, it's really not. And if you're gonna do a custom manufacturing business, that can kind of cap out. We probably could have capped out what we were doing. I think our facility before we sold, we were ramping up to maybe be like cap out at 15 to 20. So if you're gonna cap out at 15 or 20 million in revenue based on kind of our projections, like the average unit being about 200 grand, we want to be able to net, have a 30 cent or 30% net margin, which that's the opportunity in custom is it may not be a shit ton of volume, but you can make nice margins. Margins weren't really where we wanted them. It was a very stressful business that wasn't having the upside of the high margin, and it was time to move on. At that point, I was working, had our business with Kevin Harrington and stuff. But yeah, it was. I'm grateful for the experience, but I'm doing some things that don't lose me as much sleep. So
Right. I think to jump back to kind of the I love my freedom side, the cool thing is like all this kind of the synergy that me, and now kind of had was all because we were passionate about the same thing, being Trump. We all unequivocally supported Trump. And so it's funny because now you look at Trending Politics, which is our news website. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but we were doing like 20 to 30 million website visitors a month. And so we've been putting a lot of emphasis on brand and quality. We have some really awesome writers. We put out really good content, really timely, relevant stuff. And when you look at us three, basically built an e-com brand and a news site that is influencing the amount of people. It's influencing when all three of us came into this with zero political connections and zero political background. I think it's really fascinating. We've been able to survive the fact check storms that have hit. I mean, all it is you just have to be real and honest, and you have to know the line you can't cross. And there's been a lot of news sites that have gotten whacked, but we do put a lot of effort into making sure literally everything we put out is true. And that's how you stay alive on Facebook, but and social. But the problem is now you have the fact checkers literally rewriting history and changing what Biden says because his campaign. We've been fact checked because we literally posted a video and a quote from Joe Biden at like an event, and they fact checked us and said his campaign clarified that that's not what he meant, and so our pages get dinged when stuff like that happens, and you can go get it fixed. You just have to correct it with the USA Today or whoever hit us with the third-party fact check on Facebook. But that's been one of the most interesting things to watch in politics is now you have companies that are somewhat partisan now being the arbiters of truth and free speech and letting the Biden campaign rewrite whatever they want. When you look at the New York Times, I think it was New York Times like 2 days ago, retracted something they said that Trump said to the attorney general or someone in Georgia. They reported that story that Trump, I can't remember exactly what he said, but was basically like super pushing him to find the lost ballots and whatever. And the New York Times can now retract that, and they have zero, nothing's going to happen to them for lying and letting a story run. Same with like the police officer that died at the Capitol. They ran wild saying he got killed by the Trump mob, but his family was sitting here saying, like, don't politicize it. That's not what happened. And so, but they were allowed to run for months lying about that. But God forbid we say one wrong thing that came out of Joe Biden's mouth because 3 hours later his campaign wanted to fix it. We're going to get hit for it. And so I think that's where there's a problem with social. There needs to be more of like a board that's kind of overseeing this with mixed political ideology. And they're getting there. I think Facebook's doing some stuff now. I can't remember what it was. I saw an article about it recently where they had a pretty diverse array of people, and they overturned some hydrochloroquine studies or whatever that, you know what I'm talking about on that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think they're going to be forced to, they're just going to, I don't think any of these companies can afford to lose half the country as a user base. So I think they have to be a little bit more open-minded about this stuff.
Yeah, it's,
I mean, Parler single-handedly grew because of Facebook and Twitter censorship.
Well, they moved the goalposts. They said, if you don't want to be on Twitter and Facebook, make your own app. So they did. But what happened? They all conspired, and Amazon and everyone took Parler down because it was a quote-unquote conservative echo chamber, which it turned into that because you pushed everyone away from everywhere else.
And it didn't even start as an app for conservatives. It started as an app for free speech, and it just turned into an app for conservatives because their shit wasn't getting censored. But yeah, so enjoyed catching up, man. I mean, we've been about an hour and a half right now, so this was a great convo. Anything you'd like to share before we bounce?
I think to the people listening, they probably know you well, but I think you're a super authentic person, and the relationship we've had has been awesome, and some of the people that you've sent our way have been really cool. So the people following you, they're doing a good job of following you. So you're a good person to be following.
Thank you for the kind words, man. Appreciate
Absolutely.
That. Thank you for listening to Openly Outspoken with Jeremy Adams. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player so you get updated when new episodes are live. If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support is to leave a 5-star review and share the podcast with people in your life that you feel would benefit from these types of discussions. Visit openlyoutspoken.com for additional details on the show. Find out how to connect with Jeremy on social media and learn more information about Jeremy's personal and business life. We'll see you next time.